Hello again. Once again, my name is Stephen Flanders. This is 15 Minutes to Save America, episode number 5. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Progressive Era. Now, the Progressive Era was itself a reaction to the robber baron era. People got pretty upset about the monopolies and trusts running over them. The first thing they did was to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act, but it has been only rarely enforced and has never been very effective at rolling back corporate dominance. Okay, what happened in the progressive era was 4 different constitutional amendments and the Federal Reserve. There was the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th Amendments, and the Federal Reserve. Now, let me go after those one at a time. First of all, the 16th Amendment set up the IRS, a progressive income tax. The sentiment was that we needed a way to make sure the rich were paying their fair share, and a graduated income tax would do that. Okay. The problem with the 16th Amendment is it set up a very unbalanced tax structure wherein the taxing entity was far more powerful than the people paying the taxes. The best analogy I have for the way our system is supposed to work along those lines is to think of the federal government as this big, strong, huge bear wearing mittens. The state and local government, the state governments are basically the analogous to, dogs, big cats, okay? The county and city governments are analogous to rats and squirrels, possums, smaller animals that can be controlled by the dogs and cats. And then the citizens are analogous to small insects like ants. Now, if the local taxing entity, the level of government that's supposed to have the most power, the little local mice and rats and squirrels start getting out of hand, the local population, even though they're all small insects, can band together and really control that small mammal. Okay, and that's a balanced structure. By setting up the IRS, we not only took the gloves off the bear, because the bear is really good at controlling the plants and the bigger animals, and the bigger animals control the smaller animals, and the smaller animals are good with the insects, right? But they not only took the gloves off the bear, they gave it a pair of tweezers and allowed it to look into the most minute details of our individual financial lives. There's nothing we as an individual can do to dissuade the federal government from doing stuff. But the federal government, being strong and powerful like that, can do pretty much anything it wants to us. And then they had, with the IRS, an unending and unaccountable stream of revenue. So it was very unbalanced. The 17th Amendment, similarly, was a bad mistake. The senators were originally to be appointed, voted in by the state legislatures. This ensured that the Senate meeting in Washington, D.C., represented the minds of the states. Okay, each state had a different way of looking at it. If a senator didn't do what the state legislature wanted, if they weren't defending the interests of the state legislature could recall them and did quite often, okay? That all kind of came apart. I mean, the reason that people wanted to go to direct election of senators is because the corporations had gotten so much power and were operating behind the scenes to name whoever they wanted to the Senate. Okay, the state legislature was just rubber stamping what the oligarchy wanted. And so the people wanted to have a better control of it. Problem is, direct election of senators just makes it to where, all they have to do is get a whole bunch of financing the last year of their 6-year term and appear to be good people. And the rest of the time, they're playing the good old boys club in D.C. They're actually less accountable. Because in the older system, if some senator was doing something that really offended some citizens, those citizens could go to the state legislature and make moves to get that senator relieved from office. So the direct and the other thing about the system that we set up originally with the state the state legislatures voting them into office was something we copied from the Iroquois. The Iroquois, when they would sit as a nation, each tribe, each people of the Iroquois would have their own place in the longhouse in the council, and each tribe would discuss an issue until they came to a consensus, and then they'd pass it on to the next tribe, and they would discuss it. Everybody listening to them, but only the spokesman from those tribes discussing it at that moment. And they'd pass it on to the next. And when the proposal would go around the room and everybody would be saying, yeah, we agree with that. It had been modified and worked on. The mind of each tribe was active in that council. Then they'd have a consensus, and that would be the new law in the whole nation of the Iroquois. That's a really good way of doing things, and that's something we borrowed from the Iroquois, and it was done away with direct election of senators. The other amendments, the 18th Amendment, well, that was prohibition of alcohol, and it failed. It was repealed by the 21st Amendment. The 19th Amendment was women getting to vote, and not only am I still in favor of that, I think it would be impossible to reverse, so we shouldn't even think about trying. And I don't think they've done any worse than men. The whole thing has been falling apart because of the corporate personhood and the rising oligarchy that's been hidden by a corrupt press. Okay. The Federal Reserve, on the other hand, was a direct abrogation of congressional duties to issue coins and regulate the value thereof. Too much of our money supply is controlled by the Federal Reserve, which is, while the people on it are named by the president, it's really a private corporation that controls our money in the interest probably of the oligarchy and not in the interests of the people. So that's really what the progressive era came down to. The other aspect of the progressive era that really stayed with us and got bad at that time was Woodrow Wilson and Walter Lippmann, a noted intellectual writer and columnist, both came to believe that we needed a government of experts, that things had gotten too complex. Government was too complex for common people to understand. And so we needed to have experts. That's where you have all the bureaucrats gaining permanent power in Washington, D.C. The truth is, government hadn't become any more complex. It's just all the issues of government were being sucked into Washington, D.C. instead of decided at the local and state level. So it looked like it was too complex, and it looked like individual people couldn't have much to say. It's just like individuals can't have much to say about IRS policy. Individuals couldn't have much to say about government policy when it's all decided at D.C. But while all of this is real difficult because of the control press to find any quotes from anybody at this time and in that era confirming this idea of what was going on in the country at that time, I did find one, and I want to share it right now, which is William Allen White, he was the editor and publisher of the Emporia, Kansas Gazette, good writer, well-known, very influential in politics in the late 1800s into the 19 teens and stuff. Instrumental in getting Woodrow Wilson in office, big ally of Theodore Roosevelt, and, well thought of, knew what was going on. Anyway, when Woodrow Wilson passed away, it was after a long, lingering illness. He had a stroke and he died in 1924. William Allen White had been writing his biography for quite some time and published it right after his death. And in it, he's really trying to lay the groundwork for people to continue to try and pass the League of Nations, which I think Mr. White and a lot of other people saw as the only real option of standing up to the plutocracy. In that book, the biography of Woodrow Wilson by William Allen White, on page 134, I found the following quote describing the thinking Woodrow Wilson was going through in about 1902 when he decided to enter politics, leave being just a professor at Princeton and started into politics. This is the quote. Doubtless no deep mysticism is needed to account for this sense of portent. America was cutting loose from her mooring of national isolation. The Spanish War was making us a world power, In our home affairs, dramatic questions had arisen. Fearful doubts in the hearts of millions of Americans who were asking, is our imperialism divinely sent? Have we solved our home problems well enough to warrant our taking on new duties? Is the plutocracy that governs us wise enough and honest enough to rule the world? If not, if imperialism is wicked, if our domestic politics is rotten, if our plutocratic leadership is mad, what shall we do to be saved? These questions, like great alarms in the night, were clanging through the souls of thinking men, disturbing their peace, calling them to action. Is it strange that Woodrow Wilson, historian and publicist and Celt, a born world ruler, should pace his college walk in vague, restless discontent? This is the moment that Woodrow Wilson started thinking that something needs to be done. Walter Lippmann spent the rest of his career, which started around 1910, 1914, working to come up with a way that democracy could still work in the face of this plutocrat establishment, and never succeeding because none of them either had the sense or the courage or the integrity to ever question corporate personhood. And so here we are with, the 16th and 17th and 19th and Federal Reserve, all these amendments still in place, corporate personhood still in place, the press still hiding the truth from the people to keep the oligarchy in power. And now we proceed. The next edition is going to be focused on Franklin Delano Roosevelt and what happened to further our decline during the Depression. Thanks for watching. Be sure and share this. Thank you. Once again, real quick review where we're at. The blog is lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com. The post that contains almost all of this, although it doesn't have everything I have about the progressive movement that I just talked about, but it's lifeinafascistcountry.blogspot.com //how-and-y-2-save-america.html. Now, what we've looked at so far is the invention of the telegraph and how that led to the ability of the rich to control the press, how then by some underhanded court moves, the wealthy got corporate personhood declared. In episode 3 and episode 4, we went into that, not only how they got it done, but how much better off we'd be if corporate personhood was revoked, and how we could still have a really good nation without it. His latest edition is number 5, 16th and 17th Amendments in the 18th and 19th Federal Reserve, and the government by experts that Woodrow Wilson brought into existence. We're going to be going into the Franklin Roosevelt, fascist coup, socialism, Social Security. In 1947, the First Amendment was twisted, how all of these together led to the loss of local community moral self-government, which I talked about in the first edition, and the lost blessings of liberty, how they can be recovered, how a reform and refounding could happen, and how all of that could be done by the establishment of a true public forum. Once again, thanks for watching. Be sure and share and follow, and look for the next one.